Silas Thorne didn't trust the wind in the high Nevada desert. It carried the scent of rain that never fell and the cries of coyotes that weren't there. Silas was 60 years old, with hands like gnarled oak roots and a heart he'd kept padlocked since the Great War. He lived 3 miles outside the town of Oakhaven, a place that looked like a postcard but felt like a cemetery. He was out by the north fence line, whittling a replacement peg for his barn door when he saw it, a flash of white against the jagged red rocks. At first, he thought it was a discarded flour sack. Then it moved. Silas didn't run. Men like Silas had learned that running only makes you a target. He walked, slow, steady, his boots crunching on the sun-baked alkaline crust. As he got closer, the shape took form. It was a woman. She was huddled in the shade of a greasewood bush, her body vibrating with a rhythmic, silent shaking. She wasn't wearing a dress. She was wrapped in a heavy velvet theater curtain, deep crimson, moth-eaten at the edges, and stained with something darker than dust. "Mornin'," Silas said, his voice like gravel shifting in a tin cup. The woman shrieked, a sound that cut through the desert silence like a jagged blade. She pulled the heavy velvet tighter around her throat. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown out until they were nothing but bottomless black holes. Her face was streaked with soot and silver tracks of dried salt. "Don't," she whispered. It was the same 2 words Silas had heard 100 times in the trenches of France. "Please don't." "I'm Silas," he said, staying 6 feet back. He held up his whittling knife, then slowly, deliberately, folded the blade and tucked it into his pocket. "You're on Thorne land. And on Thorne land, nobody gets hurt unless they're a rattlesnake. You a rattlesnake." She didn't answer. She just stared at his boots. Silas looked down and saw her feet. They were bare, the skin shredded by the volcanic rock of the ridge. She had walked a long way to find a place to hide. "Cabin's half a mile that way." Silas pointed with his chin. "Got coffee. Got a stove. Got a door that bolts from the inside." He turned his back on her. It was a gamble. He walked toward the cabin, not looking back, counting his steps. He got to 40 before he heard the heavy, rhythmic drag thump of the velvet curtain trailing across the dirt behind him. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke and fried salt pork. It was a man's space, functional, cold, and quiet. Silas pulled a chair away from the table and pointed to it. The woman sat, but she didn't let go of the curtain. She sat like a bird ready to take flight, her knuckles white as bone where she gripped the crimson fabric. Silas moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who had hurt her. He just set a tin cup of black coffee in front of her and a plate of cold biscuits. "Eat," he said. She looked at the coffee. Then she looked at Silas. "They're coming," she whispered. "Who's they?" "The town. The men with the white gloves." Silas paused, his hand on the handle of the cast-iron stove. White gloves. Oakhaven was a mining town. Men there had grease under their fingernails and coal dust in their lungs. Nobody wore white gloves unless they were burying someone or getting married. "Oakhaven is a quiet place," Silas said. "Too quiet sometimes." "It's a stage," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "The whole town. It's just a stage. And they're the audience." He reached out, instinctively wanting to help, to offer a bandage. "Don't look behind the curtain," she sobbed, pulling the velvet back up with a violent jerk. Her voice went high and thin, a hysterical edge creeping in. "Please, Silas, pull the latch, bolt the windows. But whatever you do, don't look behind the curtain." Silas looked at the crimson fabric. He realized then it wasn't just a wrap. She was clutching something inside it, something small and hard. He sat across from her, his shotgun leaning against the wall just inches from his hand. "I was a lawman once," Silas said quietly. "Before the war. I've seen what men do when they think God isn't looking. I don't spook easily." "This isn't about God," she said, her eyes finally meeting him. "This is about what's under the floorboards of the Grand Theater. This is about the unspoken. The town feeds it. Silas. They feed it, so it won't come for them." The wind outside the cabin picked up, rattling the shutters like a ghost trying to find a way in. If you've ever felt that chill down your spine, when you realized the place wasn't as peaceful as it seemed, You know exactly what Silas was feeling in that moment, before we find out what was truly hidden in the heart of Oakhaven. Take a second to hit that like button. It helps these stories of the Old West find the people who need to hear them. And if you're still with us, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Is it quiet where you are? Or is the wind telling you stories you'd rather not hear? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a conclusion of this tale. Because out here, the truth is often scarier than the lie. The sun was dipping below the horizon, turning the desert into a sea of bruised purple, when the sound of hooves drifted up the ridge road. Not one horse. 6. Silas stood up. He didn't tell the woman to hide. She was already under the table, curled into a ball of red velvet, her breathing shallow and fast. Silas stepped out onto the mayor. Sheriff. Silas nodded. Long ride for a Tuesday. We're looking for a piece of property, Silas, the sheriff said. Belongs to the Grand Theater. A certain ornamental drapery went missing, along with the girl who was tasked with cleaning it. Haven't seen any drapery, Silas said. I'm a rancher. I deal in wool and dirt, not velvet. The mayor leaned forward, his horse shifting uneasily. Silas, you've lived here a long time. You've kept to yourself, and the town has respected that. We didn't ask questions when you came back from the war with those night terrors. We didn't ask why you never go to church. I do my praying in the hills, Silas said. Well, the hills aren't going to protect you now. The mayor's voice dropped an octave. That girl is sick. She has a fever of the mind. She's dangerous. She carries secrets that she doesn't understand. Secrets that keep the lights on in Oakhaven. Hand her over, and we go back to being neighbors. And if I don't? Silas asked. The sheriff reached for his hip. Silas was faster. The shotgun was in his hands, the twin barrels leveled at the mayor's chest before the sheriff could even unloop his holster. The clack-clack of the hammers. Cocking was the only sound in the desert. On Thorne land, Silas said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. The law is me, and I'm telling you to turn those horses around before I decide you're all rattlesnakes. The mayor stared at Silas. He looked at the shotgun. Then he looked at the cabin window. Silas didn't wait for morning. He knew the town would return with more men, more guns, and more fire. He saddled his mare, put Clara on the back, and rode toward Oakhaven. But he didn't go to the sheriff's office. He went to the Grand Theater. The theater was a massive Victorian monstrosity that sat in the center of town like a black tooth. It was midnight. The streets were empty, but every lamp and every window was lit. The town was awake. They were waiting. Silas used the eye-shaped key on the cellar door. The hinges didn't creak. They were well-oiled. The air inside smelled of incense, rot, and expensive perfume. Clara gripped his coat sleeve, her breath hitching in her throat. Don't look, she whispered. Please, Silas. Just burn it. Burn it all. They reached the center of the basement. There, hanging from the ceiling, was another crimson curtain. It was huge, 30 feet wide, cordoning off a section of the room. Silas felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He had walked into German bunkers. He had cleared tunnels in the dark. But he had never felt a malevolence like this. He stepped forward. Silas, no. Clara sobbed, falling to her knees. He didn't listen. He was a man who needed to see the wound to heal it. He reached out with a gloveless hand, grabbed the edge of the velvet, and pulled it back. He didn't scream. Men like Silas don't have screams left in them. Behind the curtain wasn't a monster. It wasn't a demon. It was a gallery. Dozens of glass cases. And inside the cases were the unspoken. It was the missing people of the territory. The drifters. The orphans. The ones nobody searched for. They weren't dead. They were preserved, kept in a state of living stasis by the chemicals Silas had seen burned into Clara's shoulder. They were being used. Their organs, their blood, their very essence was being harvested to fuel the prosperity of the town. Silas saw the mayor's daughter, who had allegedly died of consumption 3 years ago, sitting in a chair behind the glass, her eyes open and glassy, a tube running from her arm into a silver vat. The town of Oakhaven wasn't wealthy because of gold. It was wealthy because it was selling life itself to the highest bidders in the East. "The audience is here, Silas," a voice said from the shadows. Silas spun around. The mayor, the sheriff, and half the town stood at the bottom of the stairs. They weren't holding guns. They were holding candles. "We all have to give a little to keep the town alive," the mayor said. Clara was supposed to be next. She was the finest specimen we'd found in years. Silas looked at the people in the glass. He looked at Clara, who was shaking on the floor. Then he looked at the barrels of oil stacked against the far wall, the fuel for the theater's lamps. He didn't say a word. He didn't offer a moral. He kicked over the nearest lamp. The fire took hold of the velvet curtain instantly. The crimson fabric turned into a wall of roaring orange flame. The theater was old wood and silk. It was a tinderbox. "Out!" Silas roared at Clara. He didn't fire his shotgun at the townspeople. He fired it at the glass cases, shattering the illusions, breaking the stasis. The chaos that followed was a nightmare of fire and shadows. Silas carried Clara out as the grand theater began to collapse in on itself. The townspeople didn't try to stop him. They were too busy trying to save their investments, screaming as the flames consumed the cellar. By dawn, the grand theater was a smoldering pile of ash. The town of Oakhaven didn't rebuild it. In fact, they didn't do much of anything. Within a month, the mayor had moved away. Within 2, the sheriff was found dead of a self-inflicted wound. The unspoken remained unspoken. No one went to the newspapers. No one called the federal marshals. Because every person in that town had a secret in that cellar. Every one of them had benefited from the horror behind the curtain. To speak of it was to condemn themselves. Sometimes, people ask why Oakhaven became a ghost town so fast. Why the people who stayed won't look you in the eye. They'll tell you the mine dried up or the water went bad. But Silas knows the truth. Healing isn't just about medicine. Sometimes, healing is about burning down the things that make you sick. It's about realizing that some curtains are there for a reason, not to protect what's behind them, but to hide the rot from those who aren't ready to see it. If you ever find yourself in the high desert, and you see a man whittling on a porch beside a woman in a yellow dress, keep writing. They've seen enough of the world's theater. They're just waiting for the sun to go down in peace. Because out here, the stories don't end. They just wait for the next person brave enough, or foolish enough, to pull back the curtain, take a deep breath, pour yourself another cup of coffee, and remember, the truth doesn't care if you're ready for it. Until the next tale, stay safe and keep your eyes on the horizon.